Being here. You have all been involved in the very important work of bringing cities back from the brink. Kathy's been working with the city of New York since the fiscal crisis, post-fiscal crisis. You guys have a blank slate, really, in some sense, have had a blank slate because Detroit and Stockton have had bankruptcy, and you can really revision these cities. Mayor Duggan, your work in Detroit has been singularly impressive. The unemployment rate has plummeted from 18% during your tenure to about 7%. It's been a wonderful story. You're not out of the weeds yet. There were some layoffs announced recently at GM that are going to affect Detroit. So how do you keep the momentum going?
Well, Ginia, let me start with the first thing is that Detroiters would not accept the characterization that Detroit's a blank slate. They're very proud of what is there, and that what we need to do is build on what's strong there and not create fresh. But you look at where we were from 2000 to 2013. Detroit lost 260,000 people. That's bigger than the entire population of Buffalo moving out in 13 years. If you can imagine Buffalo, New York, empty, all the buildings and shops left behind, but no people there. That was what we were coming out of.
Right.
And so, you know, it was a whole series of things. We took a lot of really good vacant houses and we put them on a website like eBay, and we auction off for every day, and we move people in. Then we make deals for people to come in and fill in the storefronts. And then we made success with a lot of employers coming back, and then started training programs for Detroiters who were there. So everything doesn't go our way. The Hamtramck plant, the General Motors plant, was down to 1,500 workers. They were building cars that weren't selling. They were down to one shift. That's a step back, but I think you're going to see some announcements shortly that will show that we've got a lot more momentum going forward.
And I want to point out, you've also done the real work of broken windows, which in many cities transferred into stop and frisk, but you really fixed lights and fixed.
Well, when I got elected 5 years ago, half the street lights in the city were out.
Right.
And so Detroit became the first city in America with 100% LED street lights. And people say, well, you were visionary. Well, no, when half of them are out and you got to replace the system, you have a chance to jump a generation ahead. And we've tried to do that on IT at the police department and a lot of other things.
And how do you work toward preventing the kind of problem that other very successful cities have had, which is keeping the city livable for working people as rents go up, as property values go up, as more luxury development comes in? Yeah,
we spent a lot of time in Brooklyn and D.C., and nobody would have expected the kind of some call it gentrification, whatever you want to call it, as fast as it happened, and people were displaced that quickly. And so we've got a great national planning director who actually came from here, Maurice Cox, and we're saying, if you were in Brooklyn and could rewind the clock 20 years, what would you do differently? And so now everybody who develops an apartment building in Detroit, with any support from us, and there's lots of apartment buildings being filled up, 20% of the units are set aside as permanent affordable. We're not going to have one section of the city for high income and one section for low income. People of all incomes and backgrounds are going to live together. We don't let Detroiters get forced out to move others in. We had a landlord try to kick 200 Detroiters out on 30 days notice about a month ago. I stepped in, I dealt with it, I got the new owner to work it out. And so we are very consciously making sure, because the people who elected me weren't the 260,000 people who left, they were the 700,000 people who stayed.
Right.
And we're making very sure this city is redeveloped in a way that's respectful of those who stayed.
Right. Mayor Tubbs, you're about to embark on an experiment in universal basic income. Which is a concept that many economists champion, and even on the libertarian and liberal sides, because it eliminates a lot of bureaucracy. Give people money, see how their lives improve. And you are going to be experimenting with $500 a month to a certain number of families. My question to you is, how do you measure the success and know to scale it up? And secondly, not to sound like Sean Hannity, but financial education is not, it's not an innate thing for many of us. And how do you make sure that people are going to use the resources that they have wisely?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. I'll answer your second question first, because I think we get that a lot locally.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I don't know if I agree with the assumption. I think that folks don't have money not because they don't know how to manage money. I think we don't know, right? But
we don't know,
the
right?
Folks I know but the folks I know, including my mother, who are one paycheck away from being in poverty, they are actually very creative with money. It can make $10 last weeks and months, and I'm sure you see that in Detroit as well. So I'm not sure financial education is necessarily the most important support needed for folks, but let me backtrack and say how we even got to basic income in Stockton.
Absolutely.
So Stockton's in Central Valley, a city of about 300,000 people. 23% of the population in poverty, median income is $46,000, and I think the crux of all
which
of our—
is below national.
Which is below national, below state. And the crux of all our issues is poverty. When you have 23% of the population in poverty, of course you're not gonna have good school outcomes, of course you're gonna have violent crime, et cetera, et cetera. So I was meeting with my staff and I said, let's find the most radical intervention for poverty. And don't give me a program. I've spent time with the Harlem Children's Zone. I know credible career pipeline, I believe in it, but give me a policy. And they came back with basic income, give people money. And at first, it actually played with some of my own assumptions, right? I think we have, especially in America, we have this deeply held value that people should work. And work
and nothing should come too easily.
And work is good. But over the course of doing this experiment, I found out that there's a term called the working poor, that there's millions of people who are working and still can't afford not niceties, but necessities. So long story short, and also just studying Dr. King and learning that this was part of his agenda for—
There's a long history. The concept has a
long history. And socialists like Donald Rumsfeld and Richard Nixon, et cetera, we're excited. Milton Friedman, we're excited.
Not socialists.
No,
Donald Rumsfeld's not a socialist.
Well, they call me socialist. I'm saying these socialist luminaries like Richard Nixon were—
Richard Nixon was responsible for Section 8. You know, so there was much more bipartisan support.
But in terms of how we measure, we have researchers from University of Pennsylvania, University of Tennessee, and they're looking at really three fundamental things. Number one, how was the money spent? Number two, what impact does financial stability have on things like health outcomes?
Right.
And then number three, sort of, what impact does having cash have on like financial security? And,
right.
And how does that help people feel connected towards community? So we started disbursement in February. Incredibly excited because I think for me the premise is that the status quo is so unacceptable. When 1 in 2 Americans can afford one $500 emergency, I think the conversation has to be about not this idea of basic income being crazy, but the idea that folks are working and are homeless in our country, or folks are working and can't afford to pay bills, and especially in California with rising housing costs, that we need all solutions and all policies on the table. So I'm happy to offer Stockton up as a test case for a guaranteed income, basic income, and that's even before talking about automation and threats from technological revolutions and things of that sort.
Speaking of technology, Amazon is in the news, going to New York City, HQ2, which seems to me to be a little bit like when Emma Stone gets the guy at the end of the rom-com. You're like, whoa, couldn't see that coming. I mean, it was sort of fated in a way. Kathy has been involved in that. I mean, what is the point now of these mid-sized cities when these competitions come again, even bothering? And should we be chasing these tech giants to bring jobs? Kathy?
So the Amazon story in coming to New York, competition that took a year, 238 cities applied to be HQ2. New York is one of the winners, not the only winner. But New York is looking forward to 25,000 jobs, almost $3 billion investment by Amazon in building a 20-acre campus in one of our neighborhoods in the boroughs, Long Island City, in an area that was a former industrial area 50 years ago and had been sort of land banked for a number of years, waiting for manufacturing to come back. And so in a sense, this is a very important story of the turnaround of the waterfront and where are the new jobs going to come from. The average job pays $150,000 in this complex. It's a big deal. They are not coming because of the incentives we offer. What New York offered is essentially a 10% discount of the highest corporate taxes in America that New York State offers. So we offered a tax reduction to make us a little bit competitive with the other places.
And so what was the big draw?
They're coming for talent. Sure. They need a talent pipeline that's very strong and very big that they can tap. And the fact that New York is in that place now is the result of more than a decade of investment by the public, by the private universities, by the business community in building this talent capacity. Every one of our universities has expanded, has done very dramatic efforts to make, and I just can't emphasize enough that partnership with the universities is
Was the key.
That's the key. I mean, City Bike helps. The many other pieces. The rebuilding of our neighborhoods over the last 40 years was essential. The bringing the crime rate down, give Mayor Giuliani his credit, all that matters. But the key is talent, and that's why they're there.
Mayor Duggan, what would you do if a competition came up like this again? I mean, Detroit was, I think a lot of people had hope that HQ2 would end up in Detroit.
You know, it was a phenomenal experience for us because everything Kathy said was right. We knew we didn't have the talent pool to compete, but the corporate business university community came together, and we said, we may not land the 25,000 person place, but we're going to land a bunch, and we are landing a bunch of 300 and 400 and 500s. And we are building our university capacity. We are building our training capacity. And it was a wonderful learning experience for us. And I think Amazon made a rational decision on the 2 cities they took. And we may not be ready for 25,000, but you're going to see us win more than our share.
But did you feel it required so much investment from people, you know,
it was
who
great.
worked for you?
I mean, it was great. So in our case, Dan Gilbert, who's the largest business owner, Quicken Loans, headed the effort. Every major company, every university, everybody pulled together, and we assessed exactly what Kathy talked about. Where's the talent pool coming from? Where are the universities? Where are the technical schools? How far away are they? And the result was we could see the gaps in what we needed. We could see we were going to lose, but we also saw we had more strengths in some places than we thought, and here's exactly what we're going to do. And in the next 3 or 4 months, you're going to see somebody whose name is well known to Kathy make a major move in expanding university presence in the city of Detroit to respond to this. So we are not saying, oh my God, we're whining we lost. We said we weren't ready this time. Here are the steps we're going to take. We're going to be ready next time.
Mayor Tubbs?
Well, absolutely. I think especially in Stockton's case, it was a real reckoning. We realized in doing the application process that of the top 100 metro areas, we're number 99 in terms of adults with a 4-year degree. So accordingly, we've been working really hard with our new governor's administration to say we need a public university in Stockton, since we're the 2nd largest metro area in the nation without one. We've been working with our private university partners, our community college, to create a real pipeline for students. And we launched a $20 million scholarship fund this January called the Stockton Scholars, so that for the next 10 years, next decade, every kid who graduates from a larger school district is guaranteed some sort of financial assistance to community college, trade school, or 4-year institution.
And you've done something similar in Detroit as well.
The Detroit Promise guarantees every high school graduate 2 years at community college, and that's been helpful.
And can you talk a little bit about how you're funding these initiatives?
Yeah, well, I spend a lot of time talking with folks with resources and means, because Stockton, we're the 2nd most fiscally healthy city in the state of California, but that doesn't mean we have a lot of money. It means we don't have as much debt as we used to have.
Right.
So spending a lot of time with public-private partnerships. So a lot of our partners in philanthropy and the business community have really stepped up and understood that what's good for the people, especially the most vulnerable people in our community, is also good for their bottom line.
To the question of public-private partnerships, Kathy, you and I have talked about this. Often in lower income communities, there can be a lot of distrust, mistrust of what is considered corporate incursion. I see this in the public housing world in New York, when the two mayors have tried to build market rate housing in parking lots that are very inefficient, and people assume that their own public housing will vanish. How do you market these initiatives in communities so that you have buy-in?
You have to work with the local community-based organizations. They're the ones with the credibility, and you have to structure those relationships. Amazon was difficult on that standpoint because they wanted non-disclosure. They wanted to keep things. They made it very hard on the governor and the mayor, and we're all paying for it now. But I think it's recoverable because we have very strong commitments to the community colleges, a number of the nonprofits in workforce development, and the whole key is going to be to show the secret in all of this in terms of getting community support is to show that the community is going to benefit and to make that clear, and not just through signing a community of benefits agreement, to make it real and to have the leadership that they trust in the community, whether it's in the churches or the CDCs or the local schools. They've all got to have, you've got to work closely with them to communicate and support that effort, and that's something that business can do a good job to support. We're trying now.
But Amazon didn't do such a great job.
Amazon did absolutely nothing.
Right. They didn't bring in the local community college.
We were the lucky winner. It was our problem.
Right. Right.
But there's nothing wrong with that. You wouldn't expect Amazon to come in and navigate your local politics.
Absolutely not. And they couldn't have done a good job of navigating it. But they are now cooperating as we work through how are we going to make clear that this is an opportunity for our communities, particularly for the community they're going, but for our communities generally. And how are we going to scale these efforts? You talked about the 20% living below the poverty level in Stockton. 20% live below the poverty level in New York. In New York, that's over 1 million people. So we're struggling to make a story and make a pipeline of opportunity that's scalable. We can't have all these little boutique workforce development efforts that graduate 20 people. It's got to be much bigger.
Some of the criticism about Amazon was that the jobs were going to go into the upper income scale, right? The median salary, I think, was $150, which, just to point out, in New York, $150,000, depending on your household size, would still qualify you for affordable housing lottery. That is how,
Hey, we got a deal for you in Detroit.
Even better when it's Stockton.
That's how rough things are. So the idea of...
We have New Jersey.
The idea of really bringing good trade jobs is rough. It's something New York has struggled with. You have diversified the building trades, carpentry, carpentry unions. Unions have been resistant to that kind of diversification. How'd you do it?
Well, I took it on directly, and there's no question about it. Men and women of color have not had opportunity in the building trades in a fair way, as far as I can remember. But the shift has happened now where 20 years ago all the development was in the suburbs. Now the great majority of construction occurring in southeastern Michigan is in the city of Detroit, many of it with tax support from us. And so we have an executive order that says if you're going to build a new building, some of these buildings are $1 billion, 51% of the hours worked are going to be Detroiters. Well, there are not enough carpenters or plumbers in the city of Detroit to fill that out. And so if you don't make 51%, we audit your books every 2 weeks, you pay into a training fund. And we now have a major training center called Randolph where 400 high school students are being trained in plumbing and bricklaying and masonry and sheet metal work during the day. And then in the evening, 400 adults come in using the same equipment and the same trainers. And so what we have done is we are seeing a rapid increase in Detroiters in the apprenticeship programs to start with, but we're also seeing a complete change in attitude. But it really took, and there was a lot of tension. But when the contractors realized I didn't care how mad they got at me, they started to put pressure on the unions. And I think now most of the unions, the plumbers, the carpenters, they're upwards of 30% Detroiters in their apprenticeship classes. They probably had 6% 4 years ago. But it takes a strong push, but it's a very exciting thing. Skilled trades is now important, and we could easily fill 3,000 or 4,000 skilled trades jobs. So you have lots of career opportunities, and we're trying to track everybody and use the purchasing power of government to do it.
I want to talk a little bit about infrastructure, because let's say we achieve all these goals, we lick the housing problem, job growth skyrocketing, we still have this infrastructure crisis. And what's interesting is, the Republican Party has traditionally been so afraid of businesses leaving when taxes get higher, which there are plenty of studies, at least in New York, that show that that doesn't really happen. Kathy, you and I have talked about the fact that Alliance Bernstein, an investment house in New York, is now relocating to Nashville because people can't stand the subway and commuting has become such a problem. So is this going to be a problem in other cities, and how are we going to deal with that?
Yeah, Alliance Bernstein described that their average employee, when they surveyed them, took them an hour and a half to commute to work each way in New York City, because part of that's the affordable housing problem, because they had to live farther away in order to be able to live. But and then when you get into the city, you have to get on a subway, and the unreliability of the subways, the breakdowns, the difficulties have escalated dramatically. But we've got a 104-year-old system that we invested in some spectacular new expansions and let deferred maintenance take over. So we've got huge problems in the infrastructure. And what we had counted on was the federal government's claim that they were going to come in and do a national infrastructure program of $1 trillion, et cetera, which of course never materialized.
Right.
Hopefully the Democratic Congress made their top priority infrastructure and jobs, and I'm hoping that that results in something, but it's pretty much fallen on states and cities to figure out how to solve this problem. We're now looking in New York at congestion pricing, for example, as a way in the Manhattan business districts, which is not an easy lift, but hopefully is something that whose time has come. And we're looking at other creative ways. How do we, this week there's a proposal that we should legalize marijuana.
Yes, I wanted to ask
the
you.
weed tax.
Wouldn't it at least just calm people down on the subway if we legalized pot too?
There was that too. So we're now looking at how do we locally. Unfortunately, local tax bases are not deep and diverse enough to support the kind of investment you need, especially if you're building new infrastructure or trying to save old infrastructure. It's expensive. It's billions and billions of dollars, and that requires real creativity. Hopefully, again, the federal government will come in, but we're not counting on them for any more than 20%.
So you're going to do pot for potholes. That's where you're going.
That's better.
We got a bumper sticker now. All right. We have a couple of quick minutes, few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes left for questions. Anyone? No one? Not a single question for these mayors and Kathy? No? Yes. In the back.
Thank you. So I just want to, the question, I'd like Mike and Michael to both, if you can elaborate for 30 more seconds on what you, I guess it's Mike with the unions, you deserve kudos. I'd love to hear a little bit more of your insights. And Michael, you deserve incredible kudos. Love to hear those insights, how it could be shared in larger cities.
Go ahead.
You first.
You know, my style is sit down and talk. And you have union training programs that are 45 minutes away from the city of Detroit. And so you got a city where 25% of our residents don't have cars. You've delivered a message that a certain type of person is not welcomed in that training program. And we've had great cooperation in moving training programs closer, coming up with transportation options and the like. But I got to tell you now, I don't have to say a word. The plumbers are out recruiting, the carpenters are out recruiting, now the electrical workers are out recruiting, and they've taken this on as a source of pride. And now I see young men and women of color in these training programs saying, I'm going to do this for a few years and I'm going to be a contractor and I'm going to own my own business. And this is what we want. It doesn't say you're going to be a plumber, you stop your education. Go get business courses at night. And this is kind of the ethic you're seeing developing in the city.
And I would just say very briefly, I think for us, it just starts with the realization that the status quo is just untenable. I think for those of us in this room, the status quo, we could talk about it, we could theorize about it, but we're not living it. But every day I'm confronted with people who are literally one paycheck, one life event, something happening away from everything being ruined. So I think that gave us the courage and the urgency to try something. Like we know that what we're doing now is not working, so let's be smart, let's be thoughtful, but we have a mandate in terms of leadership to try and to learn from it. So I think that's what motivates a lot of the work. And then I think the second thing is, a lot of my staff was scared, especially around the basic income thing when I was like, we're going to try it. But we realized in having the conversation and leading in and having tough conversations with ourselves, checking our own biases and things we hold for granted, like we spent 3 months around this idea of the dignity of work, and then we finally came to the conclusion that work has dignity, but one's dignity is not attached to what they produce. Humanity should inherently be dignified, and folks who are working 14 hours a day, or folks who are doing Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and Uber Eats, and working 14-hour days, stressed out, unhealthy, that's inherently undignified. So it's been a journey, for sure, but I think the city, myself, my team have gotten better for it because we really at least question some of these assumptions we have about kind of the economic structure, how things work, and what people actually deserve. So I started out as a skeptic, but now I'm 100% resolved in my belief that in the richest and greatest country in this nation, folks need the economic floor, at least, to build upon.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.